Okay, welcome everyone to the Montana Public Lecture Series. My name is Angela Lukine. I am the Vice Chancellor for Research at Montana Tech. This is my sixth week in the position, so I'm looking forward to having many such discussions. Our speaker today is Josh Bryson. Josh joins us from Atlantic Richfield Company, otherwise known as ARCO. He's been at ARCO for the past 3.5 years. He works to advance consent decree negotiations, improve public outreach and community education, which is exactly what he's doing here today, continue remedial investigation and design, and provide uninterrupted operation and maintenance of remedial systems. If you joined us a few minutes early, you know that Josh has a biology degree from Montana State and an environmental engineering degree from Montana Tech. He's a licensed professional engineer, a certified project management professional, and he lives in Butte. Without further ado, he's going to speak today on applying nature-based solutions in abandoned mine remediation. And just a word on logistics. This meeting is going to be recorded, and with Josh's permission, which we'll arrange afterwards, we'll try and make this publicly available. Please mute your microphones and turn off your videos just so we don't have any bandwidth issues. And at the end, Josh will speak for about 45 minutes, and then we'll take questions at the end. So Josh, over to you.
Thanks, Angela, appreciate it. Been in Butte for around 18 years, finishing up some schooling at Montana Tech, graduated from Tech, and then kind of went straight into the consulting field. And for about 10 years of that, I worked with Pioneer Technical Services, consulting to Atlantic Richfield. And for the past 3.5 years, I've been a direct employee. As Angela mentioned, I do live in Butte with my family. Enjoy it very much. Can't say that was the same when I first moved here. Kind of had a little bit of a culture shock and I guess place shock, if you will, coming from Bozeman and kind of more energetic college town, but I've certainly learned to love it. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Today we'll talk a little bit about ongoing management of historic mining contamination in Butte. We'll touch on some of the improvements we've seen in water quality in the basin. And then we'll discuss how we're going to be implementing nature-based solutions to complete the remedy in BIPSU and what those nature-based solutions, what net positive impact they'll have in our town. So Atlantic Richfield Company purchased the Anaconda Company in 1977, dating myself a little bit here, the same year of my birth. And by 1981, they completed the merger with the Anaconda Company. As we know from our environmental background, Superfund was passed by Congress in 1980. And then by 1983, Atlantic Richfield suspended mining operations. And then by 1985, Dennis Washington, the Washington Group, Montana Resources, purchased the mine and began operations in 85-86. For the past 40 years, we've been completing remedial investigation, design, and action in Butte in the Clark Fork River Valley, with Butte really sitting at kind of the precipice or being the epicenter of all that work. What we're looking at here is Butte priority soils. You can see that the majority of the site, 4,200 acres, lies north of Silverbill Creek or uphill of Silverbill Creek. And the remaining third or so lies south of Silverbill Creek, extending down towards Copper Mountain Sports and Recreation Complex and Timber Butte. During this time of work in Butte, we've remediated around 600 acres across the Butte Hill. And that work has effectively addressed 8 million cubic yards of mine tailings. So some of those wastes have been removed, like from the lower area 1, Silverbill Creek floodplain, about 1 million yards there, while others have been waste in place remedies. So capping, for example, the Alice pit, the Alice dump, about 2 million cubic yards of materials at the Alice pit is waste in place and capped. In addition to some of that more kind of prominent remediation work, We've also worked with the city to slip line several hundred feet of storm trunks, repair illicit connections. We've installed 4 hydrodynamic devices to treat stormwater at the base of the Butte Hill. We've actually constructed over 10,000 linear feet of curb and gutter in Uptown Butte. And we also completed some street maintenance and storm drain maintenance. And all that work has helped us improve surface water quality in Silver Bow Creek. So what you see here, time period 2004 to 2019, is about an 89% reduction in total recoverable copper concentrations at the edge of the Summit Valley down at Stream Station 07 by the interstate bridges on the far west side of town. Now these are average annual concentrations and the average hardness corrected standard for total recoverable copper. Looking at the next slide, we kind of see a similar trend in our dissolved copper concentrations. So, beginning with our work, early on, we didn't see much improvement in dissolved copper concentrations, but after we installed what people know as the Butte Priority Soils subdrain, or some will call it the French drain, we began to see pretty significant improvements. Overall, we have seen a 65% reduction in dissolved copper concentrations in Silver Bow Creek over the same time period, 2004 to 2019. On average, we capture about 450 or so gallons per minute with the subdrain, and we pump that water to the Butte treatment lagoons, where on average we treat about 630 million gallons of impacted water each year. There is some surface water influence to that, but majority is impacted groundwater captured by the subdrain and additional hydraulic controls near lower area 1. When you look at the data a little bit more granular, so that again, this is dissolved copper, you can see that, even though our trend line is very good and on average we do meet compliance, you still see that even after all the improvements on the Butte Hill, we still do have some of these exceedances, on the far right there. But so we realize that we have work to do. So, even though we meet standards, the vast majority of the time during base flow, we still have exceedances during wet weather flow storm events. So very close, but not quite there. So we're going to shift gears a little bit on you, a little context of Butte. Angela, maybe this will be great for you since you've been in town for just around a month now. So, Butte, we all know its history, but it's described as the San Francisco of the Rocky Mountains, a cosmopolitan city that was once home to more than an estimated 100,000 people. Now, all those people weren't documented citizens, but when you're stacked, 10 deep in a single room, you can put a lot of people in a small area. It was a city that was described as wide open, because it never slept, had a speakeasy or a parlor on every corner. And for another reason, because it had one of the most notorious red light districts in the American West. And, similar to my last presentation, I feel necessary to provide a little homage to the M&M, which we unfortunately lost here a few months ago, where, you could get your sack lunches and cigars, have breakfast or dinner or a cocktail, just by walking across the place. So hopefully the owners are in good progress of reestablishing the M&M for us. A big hill and a small stream. So everybody realize that Butte was built here for the specific purpose of mining on highly mineralized soils, and we still remain, sited adjacent to an active mine. We have a national historic district with aging infrastructure and lacking in best management practices. I spoke about, those the curb and gutter a little bit earlier, and driving around town, my wife is very well versed of what is curb and gutter and where it is not, and what the function is, and where sidewalks are and where they're not. Is one of my primary gripes. The TSS load, total suspended sediment load, and total recoverable copper and total recoverable zinc concentrations on the Butte Hill each exceed national averages of a typical urban environment by 6-fold. And then when it rains, it pours, right? It's called the Butte Hill for a reason. We've got slopes between 6 and 12%. So those storms, those flashy summer storms come across, hit our impervious surfaces, our asphalt, our concrete, and race down the Butte Hill to an extremely small receiving stream in Silverbow Creek. I think the last time I looked at data on the flows of Silverbow Creek, Blacktail Creek, I believe that about 2 CFS of the flow was being provided by Blacktail Creek, and the other 7 CFS by discharge of the Berkeley Pit polishing plant operated and built by Atlantic Richfield on the edge of the mine. So when you have that extremely small receiving stream, the natural water being from Blacktail Creek, 2 CFS, compare that to like the Missouri River, where Helena or Great Falls discharge to, or compared to the Clark Fork where Missoula discharges there's stormwater to, and all of a sudden you can see you've got some issues for assimilative capacity. That's compounded by the fact that this water entering Butte Priority soils in Blacktail Creek already exceeds the same surface water quality standards that we were being subjected to for Butte Priority soils. And Atlantic Richfield companies, the Anaconda companies, historic mining operations generally didn't, move too far south of Silverbow Creek, Blacktail Creek. The Bell Smelter was located on Blacktail Creek, down by where was it Walgreens? Yeah, Walgreens, the Holiday Inn Express is now. But other than that, there was really no activity. So be interested to see what the EPA determines in their ongoing West Side Soils remedial investigation. So what do we do? We're in this pickle, we're a PRP. What do we do to further protect surface water quality in Butte? The determination of what was necessary there was the result of 14 long years of negotiations between EPA, Montana DEQ, the state of Montana, Butte Silverbow government, and Atlantic Richfield Company. And the result was the consent decree, which was put into effect on November 20th, 2020. The work described in the consent decree, accounts for remediation of an additional 180 acres across the Butte Hill in what we call unreclaimed and insufficiently reclaimed source areas, evaluation of 13 uncaptured drainages south of Butte, evaluation of the performance of the Clark Tailings Repository, Copper Mountain, to understand why we're seeing some arsenic discharge to Grove Creek. Capture of additional impacted groundwater at Blacktail Creek and BRW. We'll optimize the existing groundwater remedy system. So that subdrain we talked about, we'll take a look at it and see if we can improve its performance and minimize long-term maintenance needs. We'll remove over 800,000 cubic yards, 800,000 loose cubic yards of material from the Silverbow Creek and Blacktail Creek riparian corridors. So put that into context, that's the same as 24 Finland hotel towers, the primary towers. So we'll remove 24 Finlands from the floodplain and transport that to a repository. And then we'll reconstruct about 1 mile combined of Silverbow and Blacktail Creeks. That'll be through the Blacktail Creek project site and the Butte reduction work site. And we'll construct 4 stormwater basins, large stormwater basins, to mitigate the impacts of stormwater from the Butte Hill prior to reaching our receiving waters. So with the consent decree, prior to issuance of it, after the agreement in principle, prior to lodging of the consent decree, and after we engaged in a pretty aggressive community engagement effort, and that included well over 30 public meetings, and 7 of those meetings were intended for the specific purpose of allowing the community to engage on what the remedy would look like. So at those 7 design meetings, those 7 design charrettes, we invited the community in, let us know what their thoughts were, and allowed them to kind of steer the direction of how the inland use would be integrated with the remedy. And about 5,000 stickers later, we're able to see, some pretty common themes of what the community desired. And then that included a need for interpretation and education, wanting a place that would improve health and well-being, somewhere you could go to have solitude, to relax and read a book, somewhere to where we could have art installations and acknowledge our culture, maybe somewhere to host entertainment events, and most common to all, a new opportunity. And I think this quote was pretty powerful. A place in Butte that doesn't remind us that we live in a super fun site. So what does it begin to look like? What it really is a 160 acre contiguous greenway of naturalized park space. Since we've had those charrettes, the team has continued to work to balance the community's vision for inland use features and amenities with the adjacent underlying remedial actions. So our goal is to have an interface between the ELU, the inland use, and the remedy that's not only protective, but resilient and maintainable, and yet delicate and virtually unnoticeable. And by maintaining a collaborative and transparent approach with agency oversight, I think we've been able to obtain that uniformity across all the project sites, across all 160 acres, while meeting the technical challenges of some very complex problems and delivering inland use on top of those remedies. So here's an example of what it will look like. This is what we call the Buffalo Gulch project site. You can see the KOA down in the bottom right of the picture, and then the Chamber of Commerce Visitor Center kind of down bottom center of the picture. Looking back and reflecting on this project, I've been working on a long time. I remember walking with my family when we're still living up on South Montana Street up above where the Deluxe was, and walking past this and talking about the technologies that we're evaluating at the time as the engineering team. And, in this project site where you now see these naturalized stormwater basins, we had actually considered initially construction of vertical concrete walls with a lined floor. We considered construction of very angular geometry basins with your typical trapezoidal berms with HDPE and PVC liner. And we even explored underground networks or labyrinths of like contact arch culverts, or we looked at Atlantis D HDPE blocks, plastic blocks that really remind you of like what a crate would be, and then wrapping those in a geosynthetic and reconstructing the site over the top of it. And looking at this now, I'm so appreciative of how far we've come from those initial concepts that were really focused on value engineering or cost benefit framework to one where we are now applying nature-based solutions as our principal design. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the basins will be less effective. By no means whatsoever. We'll still treat the stormwater runoff just as if they've not more effectively than the other technologies, and we'll have the added benefit of the ecosystem services that are provided by a nature-based solution. And then the primary ecosystem service that the basins will provide here are, of course, treatment of that contaminated stormwater. The basins will do that primarily through, Stokes Law, the settling of suspended sediments in the 4 days, which would be off to the right of this picture. And then the flow would continue to pass through these series of permanent pools and continue to polish. Additional benefit by fiber remediation at the basin edges, and then within the channels, connecting the basins due to the presence of the vegetation. And we'll also see positive impact for the dissolved fraction through biological uptake, absorption, and precipitation. So a little more engineering here. The basins are being designed not only to meet the minimum requirements of the consent decree for volume, but also to function as best as possible during most storm events. And what we're focused on there, the hydrology team, the engineering team, is that 90th percentile storm. So the storm that we see 90% of the time in Butte, Montana, is what we're really focused on. That hydrograph, how much water is flowing, the peak flow, the intensity, and the duration. And by doing that, we will have more significant, more improved, better treatment most of the time versus focusing on a singular, maximum design event. So that 90th percentile storm, I'll race through these basins and inundate, the 90th percentile zone, allowing the water to settle and or to disperse and settle out the solids, and providing that the necessary contact for biological treatment. Portions of the flow will travel through what we've conceived as a sand gravel substrate layer, and that'll allow for additional root contact, but it'll also serve as an irrigation reservoir for those plants, so we can maintain that nice riparian edge across the sites instead of seeing it dry out in the summer months. We anticipate our target, drainage rate from the detention basins is about 120 hours. And we'll do that with a downward opening penstock gate or weir, and that'll allow us to drain the cleanest water off the top. Initial kind of analysis after, I can't remember the duration of the period of settlement. Let's just say after 12 hours, we're seeing about 3% of that remaining load is in that upper column of water, while the majority of the rest of the load has already been treated in the forebay, and it's much more contaminated at the bottom of the pools. Here's kind of another mention of the ecosystem services, and that's mitigating flood impacts. The 4 primary drainages contribute to the system, drain more than 5,000 acres of land within and around BIPSU. So significant portion of BIPSU plus areas, out by Beef Trail, southwest of town here. And the basins at Buffalo Gulch and Diggins East have been sized for the 10-year 24-hour type 1 SES storm. And that results in 50 acre feet of stormwater storage capacity to really knock down those hydrographs, those peak flows from the storm events and protect downstream infrastructure. So here you can see that we anticipate to be able to knock that flow down by about 120 CFS and start to remove those solids, metals, and other contaminants from those storm flows. So moving back to the forebays a little bit and the function of the basins, the forebays, we anticipate they'll remove about 80% of the suspended sediments, while the remainder of the basins, the primary detention basins beyond the forebays, will polish up to another 80% of the remaining suspended sediments. We've modeled the system, assuming allocation of volume between 10 and 50% for the retention basins. We kind of found a sweet spot around 30 to 35%. So what we've done now is size these permanent pools for 30% so that we can kind of balance our absolute need to address water quality, but not to just have these giant retention basins in the middle of town that don't provide any benefit to biodiversity or the aesthetics of the setting. These permanent retention pools mentioned that there'll be a water source in the substrate for the natural irrigation of the wetland species, but we'll also use them to recirculate water flow through the system, and then that'll provide a nice natural aesthetic, both audible and visual for the users of the park space, but it'll also, help reduce anoxic conditions, which can result in, offing of arsenic as plants decay. Overall, we expect to see an 81 to 84% reduction of total recoverable copper and a 16 to 30% of dissolved copper across the basins, inflow versus outflow. And that correlates to a 36% total recoverable copper reduction in Silverbow Creek, and then about a 10% dissolved copper reduction in Silverbow Creek over our current values. And our exceedance rate, we anticipate will go down by about 50%. Which puts us in near compliance in alignment with what we see in the consent decree. And we're hoping for a little bit more positive outcome than what we're predicting now. The project will also result in net positive impact. So ecology, right now we have 7 ecotypes across the project areas. And if you look up in the upper right-hand corner, the red, you can see that 51% of those areas are considered disturbed, really devoid of vegetation or have significant concentrations of metals in the soils. After we're done with the projects, we expect to have 11 ecotypes, and none of those ecotypes accounting for more than 20% of the total project area. So much more diverse and well distributed across the project sites. We'll also consider the habitat needs for our local wildlife. In this project, we'll plan around 1,100 trees ranging in height and caliper, and around 1,450 shrubs. The woody species, in addition to the riparian areas around the basins and the streams and the native grasses in the upland areas, will create necessary structure for nesting, security, and foraging. carbon, net positive impact for carbon. We've learned that by simply varying the size of the planted trees that we can increase carbon sequestration by approximately 35% and stormwater capture by 84% by the time those same trees have reached 20 years of age. By the time the trees have reached 50 years of age, they'll have captured more than 53 million gallons of water and sequestered nearly 2 million pounds of carbon. We have been doing a logistics analysis of where we'll transport those 800,000 loose cubic yards of waste to. And by considering different alternatives, different locations for the repository, we've determined that we can reduce emissions of the haul trucks by about 2,800 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent and save nearly 590,000 miles traveled. Water conservation and biodiversity. I take it for granted at home. I usually just set my timer and let it go off probably more frequently than Butte Silver Bow would allow. But the irrigation systems that we do install here for some of the turfed areas will be activated based on soil moisture content instead of just on a fixed timer. The team conducted a preliminary bloom analysis for the project so that our planting plan can consider and select species in a manner that we can sequence the blooms to ensure maximum food availability to critical pollinators throughout the spring, summer, and fall seasons. We've agreed to construct a fishing pond at Northside Tailings. In that fishing pond, we intend to work with Butte Silver Bow and Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks to plant it with native cutthroat trout. Sustainable practices. Early when it came onto a land grist field, we were able to secure over 200,000 cubic yards of burden material from the Montana Department of Transportation Bridge project just west of town. We'll utilize that material to reconstruct the sites and utilize the structural fill material beneath the vertical features. By applying the leapfrog model, we hope to identify up to 90,000 cubic yards of additional material at Dean's East that will be determined clean and suitable for site reconstruction. And another, the old saying, one person's garbage is another person's treasure, I guess. We see a lot of development in Bozeman east of us, and about 50,000 cubic yards of our topsoil we're acquiring from development projects over there where they treat it as a burden. But to us, it really is a treasure because it's got a pretty high organic content, mostly hovering over 3%, some of it pushing 7%, and some of the materials we've gotten, which is pretty rich and not typical of what we can get here in the Summit Valley. Our architects, they're specifying many materials that we can find regionally, if not locally here in Butte, that are respective of our past and kind of lend a vision to our future. So renewable materials or sustainable materials, as simple as wood or bamboo. Of course, bamboo we can't get here, but it's considered sustainable. Will be integrated into the structural features in the boardwalks. Our parking lots, our park and trails will be lighted with systems that use low energy LED, and we hope to integrate solar with on-site battery storage, power storage, as an offsetting energy source for our environmental monitoring systems, our site lighting, and our vertical structures. The work that we complete here, it'll address the environmental contamination. It'll further protect surface water and human health, and it'll be a benefit to both the social and economic well-being of Butte. I looked at some studies, this one based on park economics by the 2015 study by National Recreation and Parks Association, stated that the Montana parks generated around 1,600 jobs annually, resulting in $56.5 million paid to those employed, and then an overall economic stimulus to the state of about $165.5 million. So you add another park to Butte's already pretty impressive park system, and we just increase our opportunity to provide jobs and stimulate economic activity in our town. It'll create a destination in Butte, right? We'll have a 160-acre green corridor in replace of what are underdeveloped and impacted sites now, and that will result in potential community branding opportunities and really just cleaning up our front step as you're driving to Butte off of Montana Street. It'll allow us to retain and attract employees and residents. Quality of life is one of the primary factors of businesses when selecting where to locate or relocate, so they can provide a good environment for their employees to be, and prospective employees, they also, you know, when they look at somewhere to relocate, looking at a new job, it's certainly one of the things they look at. You know, do they want to live in a city that is impacted, or they want to live in one that is vibrant and growing. Parks are also good for retaining and attracting retirees. I thought this one was pretty interesting. You know, 100 retirees with an annual retirement income of $40,000. You know, they can introduce $4 million into your annually into your community. So, you know, they put it, the statistic put it as equivalent to a small business generating $4 million, but I figure it's just a direct equivalency. So, you know, maybe we can keep some of our retirees here in town and allow them to spend their hard-earned money. Health and wellness, you know, a direct increase to Butte's recreational capacity, you know, whether it be fishing, running, or biking. You know, I mentioned the fishing pond that we'll be constructing. We'll also be constructing a fly casting course throughout the site, and then, you know, it'll create another 8 miles of trails. So the presence of a park can increase physical fitness, which of course reduces obesity rates and cardiovascular disease. And found statistics where it lowers direct medical costs. And speaking in $2,000, you know, if you transition inactive American adults to physically active American adults, we could realize a total savings across the nation of around $80 billion. So I don't know what the equivalency would be here in Butte, but it'd be interesting to correlate that only to our own population here. And the benefits to social and mental health can't be overstated. Having access to parks has been shown to reduce stress, to improve your relationship building skills, to improve your focus and attention, and you know, reduce the impacts of ADHD and just general well-being. So with time, I feel that, you know, and what I think is pretty important to the community, what we heard during all those design charrettes is the perception of Butte. So with time, outside perception of Butte will perhaps improve, and we can improve the perception of ourselves as residents of Butte. And just as the slide says, we'll be beginning a new script or a new chapter in our community that is beyond super fun. Little team recognition for people that have helped me. You know, Pioneer Technical Services has been critical, a local company. Woodard and Curran Trek, also with the local office here, that has been critical to this, as has Land Design Incorporated, who does all these cool pictures for us, and they're actually out of Billings. So thank you to that team. And, you know, we like to talk about sustainability and net positive impact, but what we haven't really done and what we really recently started to do is kind of try to quantify it. And through one of our tools, sites, sustainable initiative, we've been awarded a pre-certified gold for this project. It's the first project in the United States to be awarded that, gold and above. It's the second in the world to be awarded that, pre-construction, gold and above. And of course, the only Superfund site or project in the United States to be awarded that. So I'm pretty proud of what the team's done and look forward to allowing them to work through design and continue to succeed. And that's all I had. So thanks, Angela.
Thank you, Josh. So our tradition, since I've been on 2 of these now, is to let the students ask questions first. So Robert, I'm going to turn it over to you since you have a room full of students, and to just let you have first go at questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Yes, thank you so much, Josh. That was a great presentation, and I have a student right now who'd like to ask a question.
Hi, I was just curious what material is lying on all this stuff, or what you think would create a loss into the groundwater.
Robert, could you repeat that question for me? I didn't quite hear it.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll do that. We come closer to this.
I was just wondering what material was lining the bottom of the project, so you could stop the loss into the groundwater system.
Yeah, so the primary basins will be lined with either HDPE or low density PVC, PPE downward migration of water into what would be eventually collected by that BIPSU subdrain. So the basins, in particular, those permanent pools that you saw will be lined, and then that liner will extend kind of to the extent of the total capacity of those basins. So HDPE or low density polyethylene.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have a couple of other questions. So here I can see Natasha Chadwell.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I just had a quick question. On your socioeconomic slide, I was looking at the bottom left of the Silverville Creek area, and if I understand correctly, is that that area of Silverville Creek on your socioeconomic slide? I don't know if you can go back to it, but the stream just looked very kind of channelized in that one section. And so I was just wondering if that's our section that will be addressed during this, or what do you guys use to design that kind of sinuosity? Because as you get back further towards the creek, it gets really, meandered, but then closer, it's not as much so.
Yeah, I think this is the slide you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, on the right, you can see Buffalo Gulch, the kind of the example project site that I use. And then on the left, you can see really what's the existing upper Silverville Creek above the confluence with Blacktail Creek. Beginning about 1914, Butte Silverbow began to reconstruct that channel, or what was a wetland ecosystem really throughout the basin, into a channelized engineered feature to transport not only municipal waste, but also stormwater and produced water from mining activities. So, and by doing that, they're able to dry out the adjacent wetland system and to allow encroachment upon Silverville Creek by the growing community. Throughout the 1980s, that project was expanded by Montana Department of the state of Montana, effectively through different programs to continue to dredge it and expand it. And it was eventually finished in the late 30s under the New Deal program to be channelized through the city. So, at one point, it certainly was a natural system, most likely contained nothing but beaver ponds and big wetland areas, and that was channelized for the benefit of the growth of the community. This area will pretty much remain the same because we're bound to the south by George Street. So to the left of this image would be to the visitor center in Blacktail Creek. And to the right, of course, is Horseshoe Bend Effluent Line, Silver Lake Water Line, and the walking trail. So once we get the work at Blacktail Creek will be a little bit different. And we've divested that project to the state of Montana to complete for $20.5 million. And then our work at BRW will also consider reconstruction of the stream. What we found is that the basin itself is really comprised of decomposed granite and really sediment-laden streams due to the lack of gradient, right? It's generally flat. It's about as flat as it can get with still flowing water. So the streams aren't going to be extremely sinuous, or else they won't have, the geomorphic kind of principles that you'd want in a stream reconstruction. They're going to be rather linear, so you can maintain flow and have some sediment transport within those systems. So.
Thank you. We have one more question in the classroom from Michael.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. It was quite nice, and it looks like you've got a pretty good plan built out here. My question is, at the very beginning, you mentioned that one of the ideas under consideration at first was to use just large concrete basins as these retention ponds. You've since moved away from that. I'm sure we're all happy about that. You say the effects are about the same. I'm wondering what that does to the cost. How would the current plan, how does the cost change when you start trying to use more nature-based remedies?
Yeah, you're trying to get me to dip back into some knowledge, from quite a few years ago. I don't remember those costs, but if you look at the cost of concrete, per linear feet of pour, you're probably looking at $350 to $450, just for an average stem wall with a footer, right? And then when you expand that enough scale, that would be large enough to contain stormwater. It would be quite significant. It wasn't necessarily an issue of cost. I think it was just a natural progression of the project. and really engage the community of what would be desired. You know, those were just kind of conceptual thoughts at the time of, well, how could we manage this much stormwater at the base of the Butte Hill? How could we get that much flame? And really what kind of pushed us away from those more structural elements was not necessarily the cost, but the lack of structural integrity. So I remember those concrete walls, for example, we were going to have to construct them atop like a geofoam, if you will, to just better disperse the weight across those saturated soupy soils, some heaving sands, things like that. Moving towards more present time, you know, I saw some designs even when I was just closing out my time at Pioneer that I wasn't fond of. Just to be honest, you know, they're those trapezoidal designs, those polygonal designs, you know, very geometric shaped from a plan view looking down on it, that just simply wasn't attractive. And you know, we started sketching out different ideas, and we kind of came up with these softer edges, and then we got the team kind of
Anybody else has a question?
supplemented the team and really had a different desire and let the community shift that vision.
Thank you, Josh. It looks like the class is really active, so I have one more here from Daniel.
Hello, I had a question about your park. What kind of species are you going to be using? And is it going to be, when you think about a park, you think about like, you know, grasses, trees and shrubs and flowers being managed? Are you going to be managing any of the kind of area as far as landscaping is concerned? Or is it going to be along just like walkways from the little picture map thing you showed? Or are you just going to let it be natural and do its own thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, we call it the Silver Creek Conservation Area for a reason. And that's because the majority of it is native species and conservation area, and that it won't be developed. But there are certain points of the project sites that will be developed for the purpose of, you know, recreational enjoyment, and you know, there will be playgrounds, there will be, you know, park structures, there will be concrete, hardscape, there will be park-like landscaping that'll need to be maintained. So, you know, I just had this number from our landscape architect the other day, but I think, you know, 85% of the species that'll be planted will be all native. But then you want some of those ornamentals, right, for some color, for some different blooms and things that are really aesthetically pleasing, but don't really detract from the space, but add value, just a little bit different value. So, and then there will be required maintenance. You know, we have some, you know, a butterfly garden out here at the office here, and it takes maintenance. You know, when I go for my walks at noon, I usually pick a weed or two and try to keep it up to snuff. But to be honest, you know, the last 18 months with COVID, without having somebody here at the office and doing that maintenance, it really fell apart. So it made me appreciate what's maintainable, what's not, and what the costs are associated with that. So it will have to be maintained, in particular those more developed areas.
Thank you so much. I guess we're giving back the word to the people online, and Angela can
Sure.
maybe ask people out there.
I know I have tons of questions, but in the interest of being a good host, any other of our guests via Zoom, do you all have any questions for the speaker? Please feel free to either raise your hand or just come off of mute and ask your question. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and ask my question, but please jump in and ask a question if you have one. So Josh, you had mentioned various natural processes to remove the copper. The one that jumped off the page to me was sorption, because that's my old area of expertise back when I was a scientist rather than an administrator. Could you just walk through those again? And I guess I'm kind of wondering, my basic understanding was that this is used to manage runoff so you don't get spikes of copper in the river, and it increases the residence time in this basin. But there is some copper removal via these natural processes. So A, what are the natural processes? And B, where does the copper eventually accumulate, and how is that removed and managed?
Yeah, good question. You're putting me out on the ledge here with my expertise, so I'll just be quite honest with that. You know, you got absorption, bioaccumulation, and I think the other one was precipitation. So all these different forms of phytoremediation, we only applied about a 2% benefit to our water treatment by any biological processes whatsoever. The remainder of the benefit was really through Stokes' law and the settlement of those large grain particles in the forebays, and subsequently smaller grain particles throughout the remainder of the basins. And, you know, with those silts and fine clays, you know, it would take over 500 hours for those to settle out. So it's not practical to get those, but, you know, so we're hoping for a positive benefit from those natural processes that we discussed, you know, up to 2%. We'll be delighted if we get a higher percentage of removal from that. But if not, you know, it's not going to break us. It's not going to break us. We still expect that we'll be right on track to meet our discharge or our water quality standards at the outfall of Butte priority soils. As far as management of those accumulated metals, we've been talking a little bit to our subject matter expert on that and what kind of concern it is, and what she's been communicating to me is that it's generally not. You know, we're not dealing with extreme concentrations of metals in the stormwater. We're dealing with concentrations that are high enough to make a very small receiving stream exceed pretty stringent water quality standards, and rightfully so that those water quality standards are stringent. But so what we expect to see is that, you know, some of these plants will die, and then they'll go down to our outlet structures and be caught by our screens, and we'll remove those plants as we need to, and take those up to the Butte waste repository where we dispose of soils. But as far as being concerned about significant accumulation of metals and any form of toxicity within the basins due to that accumulation, we haven't validated that quite yet.
Okay, so you had mentioned bioaccumulation, and so I'm just wondering, are the plants accumulation of metals going to be monitored? You know, any fish or wildlife in the area, mostly fish, because you control that. I mean, is the metal content of the fish going to be monitored at all?
So we expect there to be a positive improvement in Silverbow Creek to where these metals aren't being transported to the fishery downstream of us that's been reconstructed. And then the fishing pond that I mentioned is actually not online. It will not treat any stormwater, and it'll be lined to protect it from ground. So I didn't want any confusion there. So it'll be a completely separate, completely different water source for the fishing pond, lined to protect it from groundwater and, you know, prevent downward infiltration of clean water into the impacted groundwater aquifer. But as far as biomonitoring of accumulated metals in plants, we haven't quite gotten that far to do that. Sounds like a good master student project if you're interested in the future. And then in the fish, you know, we kind of rely on fish, wildlife, and parks and the surveys they do and the data they collect to let us know how the fishery is and how how robust the fish species are.
Anyone else, please jump in. I have lots of questions because I'm the newbie. So I love the idea that this could be a master's project. And I have a former colleague who was able to monitor bioaccumulation of metals via basically remote sensing. So I just want to throw that out there and we can discuss that later. But my last question really is, you know, a lot of your images here were renderings and future projections. So what's the overall timeline of this project?
Yes, that's a good question. I've also been asked what it'll look like in winter. So we hope to start construction in 2022, and we're going to start at Grove Gulch, which is one of our smaller project sites, kind of get our feet wet. And then, you know, assuming we have a good competent contractor in place, then our procurement mechanism, our strategy is to incentivize them to stay and continue doing work. So we'll move from Grove Gulch in 2022 on to, you know, haul roads and repository development in 23 and Buffalo Gulch in 23, and continue cascading the projects on down the line. So Butte reduction works and hopefully finishing up at Diggings East and Northside tailings late 2026, 2027, and submitting our key remedial elements construction completion report by 2028. The renderings, these reflect a 50-year growth period. So these trees aren't going to be this tall right when they come on site. We do have intent of delivering, I was just looking at the quote today, trees up to some of the pine trees, I think pushing 18 feet tall in various size classes. So we kind of get that nice canopy diversity. And then during the winter, what will it look like in the winter? It's going to look white. So I think it's going to be quite fantastic, magnificent, versus what we have now. And really looking forward to seeing it take shape over the next 5-6 years.
Okay, so I lied. One last question. In one of your very first slides, you had 4 different partners, I believe, DQ, ARCO, of course. I forget the other 2. I believe Silver Bow County was maybe one of the partners. So I understand that there was a long sort of process to decide, who was responsible for what and et cetera. But how did the final plan get approved, and what was the role of all 4 of those partners?
That's a good question, and the negotiations are still confidential, I guess, but it was really collaborative, and I kind of walked in on the tail end of it, right? I can imagine being around for all 14 years of the negotiations and the starts and stops and the disagreements and the agreements, but when I came in, the agreement in principle was in place. So really it was just kind of finalizing the details of how the surface water would be managed. What were we going to do for groundwater? What was the actual legal language in the 130, 140 page consent decree document itself? So I thought it was a really good working environment, with those different agencies. You have the US EPA and the Department of Environmental Quality as the regulators, and then you had Atlantic Richfield Company and Butte Silver Bow as the PRPs. And I think it was just timing, really more than anything, the right people in place at the right time, and the right vision to kind of get it tied up.
All right, thanks. So I'm going to give our audience one last chance for questions. And then I'll be a good professor and ask any questions and then actually pause to give people a chance. All right, if there are no additional questions, I want to thank our speaker. And it's always difficult to give speakers the appropriate clapping on Zoom format, but if you don't mind, you can either turn off your mute and clap, or as Robert did, clap virtually by clicking a reaction. And so just on behalf of everyone on the call, Josh, thank you so much for your very informative talk. We appreciate what you're doing to bring this to Butte.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Take care.
Yes, bye.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Robert. See ya.
Bye-bye.